Hello everybody, Chris Teal here, director of the second annual Fayetteville Jazz Festival. Just popping in right before the next workshop, just to give a reminder. Check down in the description of this video. There are lots of opportunities to help out not only this festival through donations, but also get yourself involved playing music and also supporting scholarships for our Institute for Creative Music virtual summer camp that is still happening. We're going to do this with a combination of pre-recorded videos that the IfCM has been doing for quite a while, but new content, of course, for the summer campers at a variety of different levels, and a lot of live interactive workshops, kind of in lieu of doing jazz combos. We're going to have sectionals, all kinds of stuff. And so check out the description of all the things that are going on as we go forward after you enjoy all of these videos from the Fayetteville Jazz Festival. And now we're very excited to feature an extensive workshop and performance from a fantastic saxophonist that we are proud to have in the Northwest Arkansas region. Please enjoy. This is Alisha Pattillo.
Hi guys, welcome to the second annual Fayetteville Jazz Festival workshop. My name is Alisha Pattillo and I'm a professional saxophonist based here in Northwest Arkansas. I've lived in this area for 2 years now. Prior to that I was in Houston, Texas, and prior to that I was in Australia. I've been playing professional since I was 16 years old. I started in blues bands, studied jazz in college, and then upon graduating moved to America and have been playing in a variety of different bands that perform different styles, everything from blues, R&B, pop, soul, jazz, funk. So I'm very grateful that I'm able to have a career in music, and especially grateful to the Fayetteville Jazz Festival for inviting me to host this workshop for you guys. Today's workshop I'm going to talk about jazz improvisation, and the reality is anyone can improvise, but the more knowledge you have of harmony, the more options you're going to have accessible to create more interesting music, which is going to entertain your listener and keep your listener engaged. So I'm going to also talk about practice techniques that I use when I'm learning a tune and how I get familiar with the form and chord progressions. I'm going to dive into a little bit of actual basic theory for major, minor, dominant, and half diminished chords, as they're super important to have an understanding on what's involved in each of those to be able to get through a lot of jazz standard material. I'm going to talk about the importance of swing feel and why we must practice with the metronome on 2 and 4. And lastly, I'm going to talk about the importance of listening. Listening to jazz, it's like an accent. So if you want to copy an Indian accent, but you've never heard one, how are you going to know what it sounds like? Anyone can improvise, and I remember in jazz band, and I'm sure some of you that have been in jazz bands have experienced this. When it comes to the solo section, you have those that are real eager to play, and you have those other ones that are looking at the floor going, oh gosh, please don't pick me to solo. The difference between those two players is confidence. And there's many reasons for confidence. Confidence can be due to ignorance and it can be due to knowledge and practice and being familiar with what's going on in that song. So you want to be one of those guys raising your hands because you know what's going on, right? And that's where having a basic understanding of music theory comes in. There's a reason your band director was always hounding you to learn your major scales. If you don't know what key you're in, how are you going to know what are the right note choices? And your ears can definitely help you here, but being able to know ahead of time helps. To me, it's the same as trying to get somewhere with directions versus trying to get somewhere and taking wrong turns and just not really knowing where you're going and having to turn around and go down the wrong street, as opposed to using the GPS and just getting there in one go. So it's got to do with knowledge. So when teaching major scales, I use the circle of fifths. The reason being is it teaches you intervals as well. It teaches you intervals of fourths, it teaches you intervals of fifths, which when you get further into jazz harmony and you start learning about your 2-5-1s, that's the distance. Between a 2 and a 5 is a fourth. Between a 5 and a 1 is a fourth. So you're learning those interval spaces and that pattern that already exists in a lot of harmony and standards. You're learning that order while learning your major scales. So having a grasp of your major scales is super important. Next, learning what's involved in each chord. So a chord is basically the first, third, fifth, and seventh of a major scale. So C major 7 is going to be C, E, G, and B. 1, 3, 5, 7 of a C major scale. Once you know what's involved in all 12 major 7s that exist, I then practice that order around the circle of fourths. Now, I also put a metronome into play once I'm familiar with my note choices, because it simulates a real life playing setting where meter is happening and chord progression is going. We're on a C major 7, F major 7, B flat major 7. It also helps me from a technical standpoint too on being able to navigate around my instrument and get cleaner with that playing. So for example, major 7s around the circle, 3. So they're in order, they're in time, and I'm familiar with what's involved in each one of those guys. So the same process applied to dominance. So a dominant chord is the same as a major 7, except that 7th isn't natural, it's going to be lowered. So in the key of C, where we had C, E, G, and a B, this is now going to be a B flat. Okay, so 1, 3, 5, flat 7 in relation to a major scale. Minors. We now have 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. Okay? Half diminished. 1, flat 3, flat 5, flat 7. Knowing all of those chords in all 12 keys around the circle is a great way to get really familiar with, you know, the majority of symbols you're going to see on a page when coming across a standard. So another thing I like to do with getting familiar with chords and what's involved in them is to not just play them in order around the circle, as in 1, 3, 5, 7 in order, but to mix up those digits to create different patterns. For example, 3, 7, 5, 1, or 1, 5, 3, 7. If you always start on the root, when it comes time to improvise, you're likely to always start on the root too, because you see something and your brain automatically triggers that. So you want to do as many little mind games as possible and come up with different interesting ways to mix up those 4 notes that are in those 7th chords to come up with different combinations. Okay, so when I'm learning a jazz tune, I don't learn the whole thing from start to finish. Like, I'll play the head and get familiar with it, I'll listen to some versions of it, but when it comes to memorizing it and really learning it, I break it up into pieces. And I use like a similar metaphor. You know, when you have dinner served on this plate and there's a bunch of food on there, you don't just pick up the plate and swallow the whole meal in one go. You get your knife and fork out and you cut it into little pieces so that you can chew on it for a while and you can digest it. So it's very easy to be overwhelmed when you have, you know, tunes to learn and, oh my gosh, how am I going to remember all this? And so break it into pieces, 4 measures at a time. Repeat those 4 measures. Add 8. Make it digestible while learning. Okay? It's also important to put the metronome on to keep form. There's a lot of other tools that you can use today as well. YouTube has a bunch of play-alongs. There's the iReal Pro app, Jamie Aebersold's Band in a Box. There's a gazillion apps out there that can assist you and act as a backing band, but nothing replaces jamming with a real live human in your presence. So whether you have to call up your guitar buddy or whether it's another saxophone player and be like, hey guys, come over and jam, do it. The more practice you get performing and performing with others, the better you're going to sound and the more confident you're going to become as a player just through experience. So repetition and breaking a tune down into small manageable pieces and working on that is how I learn a tune. So let's take a simple standard like All of Me and learn the first 8 measures of it. Now, this tune only has 4 chord changes in the first 8 measures. So it starts off with a C6 chord, Now 6 chord is a major triad with an added 6. So there's a C6 for 2 measures. It then goes to an E dominant chord for 2 measures. E, G sharp, B, and D. It then goes to an A7 chord for 2 measures. A, C sharp, E, G natural, that's our 7th. And then the last 2 measures of the first 8 is a D minor 7. So we got C6, E dominant to A dominant to D minor 7. Okay, so I'm going to play the head on the first 8 measures, like the melody, and then I'm going to practice learning those chords, and I'm going to start real simple and build on that idea. So just starting real simple, getting familiar with the root, the third, the fifth, the seventh, and then creating more and more variety as my ear starts to hear the progression and I start to get more familiar with what's involved in that song. So I have my metronome set for 115 and on 2 and 4. I'll explain why that's important later. 2, 3, 4, a 1, 2, a 1, 2, and so on and so forth. So I'm just going 8 measures over and over again, so I'm really getting that sound in my head. Okay, and then once I have that down, I then hit the next 8. And then I hit the following 8. You know, and then I put them all together and there's another 8. You know, so it's like you get, let me stop that. You get familiar with what's going on and your ear starts to hear it, and then there starts to be these moments where you break free and create music, and it's fun. Like you're jamming with yourself, you know, and you got to be able to hear form, you got to be able to keep time and use your metronome to help. Record yourself playing, because sometimes you'll skip a beat and you'll not realize. Now the reason that I like to put the metronome on 2 and 4 is on the topic of skipping a beat. If all of a sudden you're playing ba ba da and your metronome's on 1 and 3, then something's gone wrong. You've dropped the beat somewhere, or you've added a beat somewhere. Okay, so it's just part of the truth meter. It also helps you swing. So Once you get familiar with what's in the first 8 measures of the song, and you'll obviously apply that practice method to the whole tune, but we're just going to do all the first 8. I like to practice an 8th note feel. So this is where I try to play constant 8th notes through the progression of the tune. I'm going to go ahead and put my metronome back on for this. 3, 4, 1, 2, short, long, short, long, short, long, short, ooga, dooga, dooga, dooga. So that 8th note feel, I'm not going da, 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 da. Some students of mine will flip their swing. Short, long, ba, ba, do, ga, do, ga, do. Don't do that. It's do, ga, do. It's long, short. Do, ga, da, ga, dee, ga, da, ga, dee, ga, da. Not da, ga, da, ga, da, ga, da, ga. Doesn't work. A lot of what I'm playing are guide tones. When I'm talking about guide tones, I mean the 1st, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th note of the chord through the progression in which I'm playing. So, you know, playing guide tones, playing the root, the bass note, and the melody, those 3 things, experimenting in time, or rubato for that matter, really helps you digest the song. If you put the backing track on, a play along or whatever, you know, that's going ahead and you're kind of practicing one-dimensional. So when you rely on yourself to keep form, to hear the harmony and play the harmony, to know the melody, and to improvise, you're taking on all roles, and it's going to make you a stronger soloist doing so. So don't get in the habit of relying on backing tracks. Like, they're fun, but it's not where the hard work lies. So the last thing that I want to touch on today is listening to jazz. Now, it doesn't mean you have to like every jazz player that exists. There are plenty of players that I don't enjoy listening to. It's the same with people and pop music, you know. The majority of the population enjoys pop music, but every now and then a song comes out and people just don't like it. Or people do like it. So find your taste within jazz. Find what you like, find what you're into, and go from there. If you don't know, ask people, you know, ask what they listen to, ask your teacher, ask your friends. Listening, like intelligent listening, focused listening, where you're paying attention, you're listening to what's being created, you're closing your eyes, you're picturing yourself there, and you're totally submerged in the music. That's where you can really hear the beauty. And if you put it on while doing something else, that's not focused listening. By all means do that as well, you know, if you're cleaning or whatever, put some jazz on, but I'm talking about just sitting down with no other distractions and focusing on what's being played. It's, you know, it's a beautiful thing. It's art. It's respecting art. So secondly, watching live music, there is an energy and an interaction and a communication that happens when you go see a live performance. You can see the musicians communicating. It's the difference between watching basketball on the television versus going to the game, you know? There's a different energy, and it's really important to witness that and be a part of that. And secondly, to support local music, you know? If you're not willing to go to listen to jazz and you're studying jazz, who's going to come listen to you? You know? Go support live music. Go support live jazz. Transcribing. Now, even if it's just a few measures or just doing the melody and not working on the solo, transcribing and copying the phrasing and the tone and all those things that go along with the parameters of whatever instrument you might be on, you know, it's basically our history books. It's our record of what can be done on the instrument and what has been done on the instrument. And so it's worth knowing that. And every time I sit down and transcribe a new solo from an artist I haven't ever transcribed before, there's techniques and things I do different here to manipulate my sound to copy and mimic them more. So another thing to consider when transcribing is don't rely on performing transcriptions out of books. Part of the process is listening and figuring it out and writing it down yourself. I have found whenever I sit down and do this, the next time I'm on a gig, my ears are just more alive and awake than they've ever been before. You know, I'm hearing on a higher level because I spent time working on trying to figure things out with my ears. So definitely write it out. When you think about how jazz was passed on as a tradition before it became institutionalized and educationalized, it was an audible art form. It was passed on through recordings. People learned from recordings. They learned from watching it live. And that is where the essence of this music and art form exist. So don't shy away from spending time listening. Listening is just as a productive use of your time as playing. Yeah. All right, guys, that's all I have time for today. I hope you enjoyed this workshop, and I hope you're staying safe and healthy. Wash your hands and swing on.